Okay, so today you got two handouts. You got your exercise 114 handout, which is very much the same as last class. The difference is we're going to do the lowercase letters instead of the uppercase letters, but I will walk you through the actual making of the font using that website, paintfont.com, so that you get the reward of having made all your letters, such as it is. You also got a handout for assignment 104, which is the Charlie Harper assignment, which is to date the best assignment that I've come up with for testing your ability to draw in Illustrator. And I have to be a little honest in that I've seen a lot of Charlie Harper for 9 years and I'm kind of bored with it. But at the same time, I've not been able to find anything better as a way of really learning Illustrator and being able to draw using the best capabilities of Illustrator. So we will cover more about this and kind of how it works as we get forward, but this semester in particular, we have this really awkward spring break in terms of where it falls. It hasn't happened here in a while, so I have to kind of make adjustments, and I never want to give you something due on the Monday after spring break or anything like that. So you guys are getting this a little bit early, knowing about it, and then you'll have a little bit of time once you get back from spring break before it's due. It is due on the 4th of April. So it's kind of a week after, what is it, Monday the 4th. So it's a week after spring break is over. So it's a little bit early. We'll talk more about it, but it can help a lot to kind of look ahead at what Charlie Harper's images look like. I see a lot of them on the screens already. And so if you kind of know the direction you're going, it can help. There will be some tools that I'll talk about in more detail as we go forward that will help you in that as well. So I don't have a lot of lecture to talk to you about today. Like I said, I'm going to do the demonstration of the font and kind of show you how it comes together. But I do want to take a little bit of time and talk through what is a vector graphic and what is a raster graphic. And I think it's really important to kind of make this distinction and to understand what the difference is, because you guys have now used 3 programs in this class. You've used Photoshop, you've used InDesign, and you've used Illustrator. And those 3 programs are different in how they treat images and how they treat basic drawing. And you in your careers as architecture students or design students are going to end up running across a variety of programs. And if you have a fundamental understanding of what the programs are and what they do, it can help a lot. So we're going to start with kind of raster graphics. And so Photoshop is probably the best example of what raster graphics are and kind of how we manipulate them. They're kind of the most common image format that we end up working with. And so raster images end up being things like JPEGs and bitmaps and that sort of thing, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's basically that individual pixels make up the overall image. And so if you look at this particular example, you can see right here the actual image itself. But over here, when we blow it up and make it really big, you see how it's made up of all those individual little squares? Right? Those individual little squares are pixels. And so when we blow up the image, and you've seen this on Photoshop, right? You keep pressing Control plus, Control plus, Control plus, and all of a sudden, you see individual little squares. And Photoshop actually separates them out so you can really see them in grid format. Those are the pixels that represent it. So let's move forward. Let's talk about the advantages of a raster graphic. So we've got some big advantages to raster graphics, and I think probably the easiest thing to think about when we talk about raster graphics is photographs. So if you can equate the two together, it will always start to make sense. Pixel by pixel color allows an almost infinite variety of color, and if we're looking at a photograph, for example, there are hundreds of different shades, thousands, millions of different shades in a particular photograph. So a raster image is particularly well suited for a photograph. Right? The problem is that when we shoot a photograph, right, let's go back to the digital camera realm. Right? We shoot the photograph, the sensor interprets the light that comes in through the lens of the camera, and when that light comes in through the lens of the camera, the sensor is gridded off. Do you guys remember that slide? Right? The sensor is gridded off and it tells what color light is hitting the sensor at a particular place. When that happens, it translates individual pixels. So there's a limit to the overall size of the pixel or size of the image that you get out of your camera. And you guys have all seen oh, this is a 12 megapixel camera, or this is an 8 megapixel camera, or it's a 20 megapixel camera, or whatever. That has to do with how many little dots make up the image. Same dots here. That's why it's a raster image. It's made up of individual little dots. It's really easy to edit these kinds of dot to dot images, because all you have to do is say, I want these colors to end up over here. We all use the clone stamp. Right? Clone stamp is copy this, put it over here. Just change the color of the pixels. That's the way Photoshop works, and it makes manipulation really, really easy. It's also really easy to apply fancier effects. We did blending modes, right? But we also did adjustments, levels adjustments, curves adjustment. Those kinds of things are available and are much easier to do on a raster image. Disadvantages of a raster image. If you zoom in, we've already seen this a couple times, you guys saw this in Photoshop, you will get a blurry image or a pixelated image where we have individual little squares of color. So it's not an infinite zoom level. We have a certain size image. If in Photoshop you crop the image down or you cut off part of the image, you can't go back and get that resolution back. Right? If you make the image smaller, it's a permanent change. And so those are things to be aware of with raster images. The other thing is that raster file sizes are extraordinarily large in comparison to vector file sizes. So you guys have worked with photographs thus far, and they might range from a megabyte to 10, 12, 15 megabytes, something like that. It's not uncommon in a big, heavy Photoshop file to have a 500 megabyte file, or even larger. And so the size is a lot bigger because the computer has to keep track of every one of those little squares. So if we think about a really large image, maybe 10,000 pixels wide or something like that, there's 10,000 little pixels times however many pixels go down, right? 10,000 by 10,000. If we multiply 10,000 times 10,000, we get whatever, 1,000,000 pixels or 100,000 pixels or whatever. I can't do the math in my head on the fly. But the point is, it's a lot of pixels that we have to keep track of, right? Especially if we have layers, we have multiple pixels on each layer. Anyway, you get the idea. Vector graphics, on the other hand, are mathematically defined shapes, curves, lines, splines, those kinds of things. So we have a set number of points, and those make up the particular shape. So in terms of the heaviness of a file, this is really easy. If we think of a square, right, let's make a simple square. A square is essentially 4 corner points. Those 4 control points define the square. They define, if we were to connect lines around the square, those would be the 4. Furthermore, it would define a fill area. If I wanted to fill that square with a particular color, it would define that area as well. Okay, so that's probably the easiest thing to understand. If we were looking at a square and it was raster image, we'd have a bunch of little pixels that made up every piece of that square. And it didn't matter where the borders were. It was just this pixel's blue, this pixel's white. Vector, 4 control points, and then we fill in the region. So it's no surprise that we use this a lot, right, for a couple things. One is scaling graphics. So whenever we do something that needs to be able to scale up without getting blurry, that would be a perfect example of this. You guys will work a little bit later on in AutoCAD in this class, but all of the drafting and 3D modeling applications work using vector graphics. So things like Rhino, those of you in the Rhino class, right? Things like AutoCAD, things like Vectorworks. Those are all vector-based because they're infinite in their size. We draw full scale in AutoCAD. Right? If a wall's 10 feet, we draw a line that's 10 feet long. Well, it can scale down to be really small, and it never gets pixelated. It can scale up to get really big, and it doesn't get pixelated. So it's really important to understand that scale is independent in a vector graphic. The other thing is that file sizes are very small. Where in Photoshop, you might have millions of pixels defined with color, same image might be 4 pixels vector-based. Right, or 10 pixels vector-based, and then it's a matter of the mathematical curves that connect those points and the fill levels of those curves. So it's much, much lighter in terms of its weight as a file size. It's also much easier to manipulate on the CPU or the memory on a computer. You don't need nearly as much to edit vector graphics. The disadvantages is that they're not good for photographs. Right? When we convert a photographic image like this into a vector-based image, you can see that it's not really photorealistic anymore. Right? It has to be defined by mathematical curves. Well, a photograph, by its nature, let's say we took a picture of a person, it's not defined by a set number of points. If I took this person, right, I wouldn't say, oh, this is the curve here that defines the side of her head, and this is another curve that defines that little bit of hair, right? And this is the curve that defines her fingers. No, I wouldn't say that. I would just say, oh, here's a bunch of little pixels that represent this particular image. right? So it's not well suited for this kind of vector-based graphic. Okay? The other thing is that vector graphics files, whether they're Adobe Illustrator.ai or a universal format called .eps, are not as easy and as easy to work with or manipulate as, say, a JPEG. Right? We're all very familiar with JPEGs. When I ask you to post something on the course website, it's a JPEG. That is a raster graphic. Right? We've converted the vector into a raster. It's of a set file size, had a set number of pixels, and generally speaking, when we're in that raster graphic format, doesn't matter what you're looking at it on. Your phone can open it, your iPad can open it, your computer can open it. Doesn't matter. It's very universal. Graphics, vector graphics, not necessarily as common. So when do we use raster graphics and when do we use vector graphics? So obviously we've hammered in that raster graphics are great for photographs, no surprise, right? Maybe also things like high dynamic range images. If we're using HDRIs and say Rhino as a background, that's a perfect example of where this kind of format is important. Vector graphics, on the other hand, would be all line drawings, 3D computer modeling, right? So AutoCAD, Vectorworks, Rhino, those are all vector-based programs. If we were going to design a logo, which guess what, next class we're going to design a logo, no surprise. If we're going to design a logo, you'd want to design it vector-based so that it could get really big if you wanted to. Let's say that your brand became really successful and you took out an advertising campaign and you wanted your logo to end up on a big billboard on the side of a freeway. Right? You wouldn't want to have drawn that logo in Photoshop and have to blow it up and have a bunch of little pixel squares. That would be ugly. Right? You want it drawn in a vector-based format. You can blow it up 10 feet wide. It doesn't matter. So that's the big advantage of vector. Oh, I should also say type. Right? We all use vector graphics every single day because fonts are perfect examples of vector graphics. You can take a font, you can change the size up to 72 point, 150 point. It still looks like the font, right? That means by its nature, because it scales, it has to be a vector graphic. So let's look at a few graphic examples here. In this particular piece, right, I have right here a little brochure, the logo at the top of the brochure, and the type. So logo here, type here. Those are both vector-based graphics. On the alternative right here is the image file. That would be obviously a raster-based. So the combination of the two makes up the overall brochure. Right? If we look over here, this is a good example of file sizes. So if we look here at the resolution 250 by 78, this happens to be for this logo here. Right? The vector size, 36 kilobytes. Again, very small. Any computer could handle either of these files. The bitmap size, not quite double. Right? A little less than double, 57 kilobytes. If we go up in size, 800 by 248, 36 kilobytes, vector size, exactly the same. Doesn't matter the scale. If we look at the raster size, or excuse me, yeah, the bitmap size, raster size, 581. Significant jump in size. If we go up even bigger, 1500 by 466, we go from 36 kilobytes again. That's that vector size. Again, scale independent, the size is the same. And look at that, we're at 2,000 kilobytes or 2 megabytes in file size. So big difference in file sizes. Here, right, we've got the graphic logo that they set up. And if we look at it blown up, we can see that it's defined by its little control points. So there's little points on each of these corners. It's hard for me to draw that small, right? If we blow it up, we can see there's one of those control points again. And look at how smooth it is on either side, there and there. Really nice. If we took the same image and it was a bitmap file, right, or a raster image file, this is what it would look like. We blow it up and we get those individual pixels. So there's the disadvantage. That's what we don't want to have happen. Sorry for the beep. I got to figure out how to turn that off. So if we look at the computer programs that run this, if we're doing raster images, it's going to be things like Photoshop. GIMP is just the free version of Photoshop that's out there. But it's also things like V-Ray. Right? We do a rendering out of a 3D modeling program. Could be V-Ray, Kirkithia, any of the major rendering programs. They're producing this JPEG image of us for us. They're not vector-based. They're going to go through and calculate pixel by pixel what does that particular image look like. So they end up being raster-based. Vector, on the other hand, no surprise, we're drawing in Illustrator right now. Illustrator is the prime example of vector-based graphics. But InDesign is also an example of vector-based graphics. Right? You define a frame that you're going to place an image in, 4 corner points, that would be vector-based. Right? So here's the mathematical, place this image inside here. InDesign is a little bit complicated because it produces raster images. Right? It produces that as an output file. But it itself is a vector-based graphics file. AutoCAD, prime example, right? We draw in very large scales. We need to be able to scale independently. AutoCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, Rhino, SketchUp, you name it, those are all vector-based graphics programs. Okay, so it's really, there's a lot of vector-based graphics out here. One of the other things that's great with vector graphics is they tend to be interchangeable. So if we're working in AutoCAD and we export a file, it's going to keep those lines editable, and we can then drop it into, say, Illustrator and make some manipulations. So vector graphics work with other vector graphics programs. Where in Photoshop, while you might produce a JPEG and you might be able to open it on any device, editing it is a little bit more challenging. Okay, so let's skip over, and I'll do the tail end of the lecture for how to put your font together. And then I'll turn you loose for your last day of practice with the pen tool. All right? Give me just a second to switch over. OK, so we're going to go ahead and continue with your exercise 114. And the techniques that we talked about last class are still viable if you're working on the lowercase letters. Again, it's very much about doing the practice, getting comfortable with the pen tool, how to manipulate using the pen tool. So I'm not going to concentrate on teaching you more about the pen tool. Instead, I'm going to let you practice. But I am going to open up a file that has the whole thing done. And so what you will do for today is you previously had this showing. Let me turn off the guide so that you can see it a little bit better. Right? You finished this setup for last class. Once you're done, go ahead and turn off the 3 lower layers here, which would be font page 1, guides page 1, and page 1 itself. Those are off. And then turn on the upper 3. And you're going to be doing your drawing on font page 2 in your layers, right? Which is essentially the lowercase letters. If you didn't finish page 1, you go back and finish page 1. The idea is to have both sets done for today. So there's my setup of lowercase letters. If I were to zoom in, we'd probably see a little bit more of the detail. There we go. Right? And I've gone ahead and I finished all of those lowercase letters as well. So when I go ahead and do my exports, I'm going to go back to the original page here. I'll turn off my guides. And if I did anything, or if you did anything to make the original page a little bit easier to see, I want to turn those off as well so that I end up with just one. Hold on a second. Let me unlock. There. That was so that you guys could see the background. I'm going to make that go away. Now that this is done, the information on this page is very important. So the template has this little QR code, and then it has these 2 black boxes which work as registration points when it goes through and looks for your file, because it looks for certain places where these curves exist. So when I export, I have to make sure that the background is on just as all of my numbers and letters are on. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File, and then I'll go to, I can either do Save for Web or I can go to Export. I'm going to do Export, get a little bit higher resolution. I'm going to export a JPEG or a PNG, and I'll go ahead and click on Save. And I want to make sure that my resolution is set at 300, and that my background color is white. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And it should ask me where to save it. Maybe it, I just saved it automatically to my folder there. And then I will go ahead and I will turn off the lower layers, and I'll turn on the upper layers once again, and I'll go to File, Export. So I need both files. This is 114 page 2. Save. Go ahead and say OK. OK, so I've saved both versions, page 1 and page 2. Now it's a matter of going online. And so we'll go to paintfont.com. There it is. And the second option down here says upload your completed templates. That's what we want. I'm going to choose the first file. Right there. I'll choose my second. Right there. And then I'll give my font a name. And I'm going to pick a TTF font. Either one of these is just fine. Under the advanced options, we could do some more information. For right now, we're not worried about that. And I'm going to go ahead and start the upload process. So I will warn you that this site does tend to take its time. And so this may take a while, especially when all of you try to do it at once. Okay? When I'm done, I should get this kind of a font preview. It looks reasonable. Notice that there's some spacing issues, like the A's are a little bit high, the B's are a little bit high. So like I said, it's not a perfect translation, but it's reasonable. And I'll be presented with the ability to download the font. If you don't see the actual readable text, it's probably because you didn't export correctly or your resolution wasn't high enough. Those are usually the two problems. So I'm going to go ahead and download the font itself, which is right here. I want to be able to use this font. Let me copy it to my flash drive. There. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that AMP font viewer. You guys remember that we used that before. It's under my portable applications, font viewer. And I'm going to install temporarily that font off of my flash drive. So it was under resources, fonts. There it is. And I'll install it temporarily. Perfect. So now it's installed. So I've asked you to go ahead and download a InDesign file to confirm that your font actually works. You're welcome to create your own InDesign file, but I tried to save you the effort. So if you go to today's exercise, I'm going to have to log in. Hold on one second. At the bottom of today's exercise, I have the sample font InDesign file that we can just download. So I'll save link as into today's folder. Save. And now I'll go ahead and open that up. Oops. Be nice if InDesign would open here. Hold on a second. All right, so let me go ahead and open that. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And so here it is written out. I'm going to go ahead and select this, and then I'll assign the font that I loaded, which was my font. There it is. And lo and behold, it works, which was the idea. So I'll go ahead and go to File, Save for Web to save a JPEG image of this file. Or excuse me, File, Export, JPEG. And we'll save it there. Maximum 300, export. So this will be the featured image of my post. That has my fonts in it. And then I'll go ahead and make the post. I'd like you to upload both the featured image and the font itself. It's possible that I haven't approved the ability for you to upload the font. I haven't tried it yet, but I'll make sure I do that before you guys do it. But I'll check it right now and just see. Oh, okay, so it blocked me. I'll fix that problem so that you guys will be able to upload it. But then again, your featured image will be the font itself written out. Okay? Are there any questions? No? So like I said, today's lecture was a little bit on the short side to give you the bulk of the time to finish. Please take your time. Really learn the pen tool and get comfortable with it. It'll pay major dividends in the future, I promise.